Good morning, and we're here to talk about the Boston Massacre, which occurred in March, in March of 1772. And what I always like to do, to begin this discussion, is to point out that for over 150 years, there had been peace between the mother country. I don't like to use that term, but between Great Britain and the 13 North American colonies. And there were other British colonies, sprinkled around the Caribbean area. But the trouble wasn't, the trouble was in Boston. That's where the real trouble began. It was in the Mass Bay colony, and then it shrank down to Boston, didn't it? So that's why it's called the Boston Massacre. The first name for it was the Bloody Massacre. And I think it was Paul Revere, who changed it to the Boston Massacre so we can pin it right down here in Boston. And Boston was a riotous town. It's where all the trouble began. But the point I want to make is, there are several points I want to make, but for over a century, there had been relative peace and good relationships between the mother country, between Great Britain and the colonial empire. And then, within 10 or 15 years, that situation collapsed, didn't it? It collapsed into the American Revolution. And you've heard me say this several times, that we had no business winning the American Revolution at all. The British simply gave up. They simply withdrew. They were concerned with the French. And I'm surprised that the situation did not resolve itself in a amicably, sitting down and working it out amicably. Instead, it went from the Bloody Massacre, or the Boston Massacre, to Lexington and Concord, and then to a peace treaty in 1783. So let's get started, and I'm trying to think of what I'll do the next time with you folks. So let's get started, if we might. And by 1770, 1771, all of the taxes, see, this was about power. Who had power? Did the Parliament have power, or was it power divided among the colonies? And for most folks, one cannot divide power. There has to be one call, one person, one institution that legislates for the colonies, or a Supreme Court, or determines what the law is and how it's to be applied amicably. So it was a question of power. Who had power, within the British Empire? Benjamin Franklin, who was always trouble, just as ask his wife. When she sent him an email, when she sent him a letter, and it took 5 or 6 weeks for letters to move back and forth across the Atlantic Ocean, that she sent her husband a letter that, I'm dying. The physician said, I'm dying. And he sent back a response. Well, I don't have time to come home. I'm busy. Don't you like that? I'm busy. She said, I'm dying. I'm busy. I'll get back to you when I'll get back to you. I mean, that's Benjamin Franklin. He and John Adams, by the way, never got along. Even at night, as to whether or not the window should be open when you're sleeping, or to have it closed. So they didn't get along. But that's not my story. The story is that not the last tax, but with the problems under the Stamp Act, which was 54 items were taxed under the stamp tax. And the tax was a very light tax. It fell on everyone equally, and the money raised would be spent in the colonies in North America, and in Boston, if you will. We're going to keep it to Boston, that one could choose who collected the taxes. It was not a soak the rich program. It was to help defray the cost of running the empire. When the British defeated the French in the war, in the 7 Years' War, or the the war in the Ohio Valley was fought in the Ohio Valley. Britain was broke. They were absolutely broke. They needed to raise money. The Bostonians, the colonials, were the least taxed people in the world. And Britain is broke. And we need to raise money. And the money raised, I'm talking about the Stamp Act, and the money raised will be spent in the colonies, and you can choose whom you want to be as your tax collector. Well, there was trouble with that. And the stamp tax was repealed and replaced by the Townsend duties, which is where we're going to go this afternoon. And the Townsend duties were a tax on just a few items: lead, paint, glass, paper, and tea. We're not going to go to the Tea Party. Lead, paint, glass, paper, and tea. And the fact that these items were taxable was unpopular. Taxation, I know you can finish this. Taxation without representation is tyranny. We want to have a say in this. I mean, that was a bluff. We want to have a say in our taxes, and we don't want to pay our taxes. In fact, I had my taxes done on Monday. It was bad news. I was hoping this time, for the first time in 15 years, I wouldn't have to pay, but I don't have any deductions anymore. My kids have moved away. I can't even deduct my dog. So, in any event, taxation without representation is tyranny. And what remained were the Townsend duties: lead, paint, glass, paper, and tea. And the Bostonians did not like that at all. And one fine evening in March 5th of 1772, the boys, the Sons of Liberty, what a great name, the Sons of Liberty. There were also the Daughters of Liberty, which rarely get mentioned. But the Sons of Liberty, some of them, and one of the ringleaders was Samuel Adams. One of the ringleaders, Samuel Adams, they're up at the Green Dragon Tavern. And you've heard me mention that before. And the Green Dragon Tavern is where it was in 1772. It's still there. It's a couple of blocks up the street. It's around the corner from the Union Oyster House.
You got kicked out of there, right?
Pardon me?
You got kicked out of there, didn't you?
No, I've been asked to leave a few places. No, I have been. Very nicely, by the manager, which is okay. When you have 7 brothers, I'm one of 8. Sometimes things get a little loud, and when somebody's had a little too much Samuel Adams beer to drink, you get a little loud, and you keep repeating yourself. Don't you? You've been there. I know you have. You're laughing. I know you've been there. You were probably the next table over. So they were at the Green Dragon Tavern, and they were having ale and so forth, and somebody got the bright idea, let's go down to the Customs House, which is no longer standing. And the Customs House was right, if you stand on the front stairs of the old State House, it's right to the left, and it's not standing any longer. But if you, so the argument was, let's go down to the Customs House, and let's raise hell. And the Customs House had one guard. Plenty of room up here. In fact, we haven't passed the hat yet. The Catholics pass the hat, don't they?
Waiting for the mailman. Sorry.
I can tell you a story about that, but you would think less of me. See, I'm a Lutheran, but when my father remarried, what a mistake that was. What a mistake that was. And in any event, when he remarried, and I'm going off track here a little bit, particularly at that time, that you had to become a Catholic, didn't you? And so I became a Catholic. I didn't even know what that was. It was something. And so I was, my brother and I would collect the money. And that's how we paid for our lunch. And to have breakfast on Sunday morning. You see an opportunity and you take it. You just don't shut the window when it's open. That's why I know that, as my stepmother would always say, I got to share this with you. My brother and I, we would be chastised for lots of things. And the one that I really remember is that the two of you are going to hell. My brother by the first marriage, and you're going to sit next to Adolf Hitler. She would say that. You're going to be sitting next to Adolf Hitler. So, wow. So, and there are other stories that we share with one another. So the Townsend duty remains. So Samuel Adams and others thought, let's go down to the customs house, where the taxes were kept. Let's go down to the customs house and harass the sentry, Hugh White. Harass him. Your mother is. Your wife is. Your girlfriend is. Your brothers are. Maybe all of them. So they went down and harassed them. And him by himself, and he could hear them coming. They were loud. They were boisterous. And the Green Dragon Tavern is just a half a mile, maybe not even, from the customs house, which, as I said, is no longer there. And they began to harass him. And a good loyalist, a good Tory, saw that this lone guard, sentry, was in trouble. And what he did is he slipped through the back streets and went down to the barracks. Now, the barracks at that time were located right behind the Faneuil Hall. And rap, 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 he knocked on the door. And Captain Preston was the duty officer that night. And Captain Preston was told about the story, about what was going on. And what he did is he got a squad of 6 or 7 soldiers, got them up. They double-timed it up to the customs house. And to protect him from a mob that was getting larger and larger, and sticks and stones were being thrown at Hugh White, and ice balls. It had begun to snow, and it was wet snow, which make wonderful ice balls, don't they? I mean, you can take a window out, with that. Hold that thought. And what he does, Captain Preston, now, remember this, he is in front of the soldiers. He has them deployed in an arc. On one side is the arc, and on the edge of the customs house with his back up against the customs house. On the other side, the arc with a soldier with his back up against the customs house. They're looking to protect themselves for making sure that no one gets in behind them. Makes sense, doesn't it? And he's standing in front of the soldiers. I'm making a point of this for a reason. He's standing in front of the soldiers, and he is reading the crowd the Riot Act. We use that term today, don't we? I'm going to read you the Riot Act. That's where it came from. It came from Parliament. It came from the King. It came from George III, a Hanoverian, who at this time was not yet crazy and spoke English very well. And so Captain Preston is reading the Riot Act. And essentially the message is, this is an unlawful assembly, and disperse. Disperse before there's trouble. This is an unlawful assembly, disperse. And that just generated another hail of ice balls and so forth. One of the soldiers, Montgomery, one of the soldiers on the end of that arc got hit in the head with an ice ball. Now that hurts. And he's got his musket with him, and these muskets are loaded. They're double loaded. Preston has told them to load up the muskets. The crowd, Samuel Adams and others, they're not loaded. They're not loaded. They're here to intimidate us. So the crowd began to shout, fire, 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 fire. And Samuel Adams turned his back and said, fire on me, you're all cowards. Fire, fire, fire. So the soldiers are hearing from all points of the compass, fire, fire, fire. Montgomery goes down, and as he slips, his arms go up, and he pulls the trigger on his musket. Now, the soldiers have been hearing, fire, fire, fire. They think the order has been beginning to fire, has been to fire. So what they do is pop, 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 pop. They fire their muskets. They're double loaded. Crispus Attucks is there as well, a runaway slave from Framingham. He's down there as well, part of the crowd. And he gets gunned down. I know you know that name. He gets gunned down, and about 5 or 6 others get shot. And Captain Preston, in front of his men, draws his sword and walks down the line and kicks up their muskets so they do not reload and fire again. If you're an officer, you're not going to give the order to fire if the men are standing behind you. You might get a musket ball in the head, and that's not pleasant. I mean, these were big musket balls, they're the size of my thumb. I mean, they tore your head off. They tore your arm off. I mean, this was a high-quality weapon, a high-quality musket ball. So he runs down the line, lifting up the muskets. And as I said, 5 or 6 are dead and 5 or 6 are wounded. That event became a terrific piece of propaganda for the American Revolution. It's in all the textbooks. You see it all the time. And for the most part, it's a lie. The only thing that's true is the date, March 5th, and the event, and that it occurred at night. And your homework, and I rarely give you homework. You know that. I'm easy. I rarely give you homework, but your homework tonight, or you can do it this afternoon, is bring down look in a textbook, or bring it down online, a drawing of the Boston Massacre as done by Paul Revere. Paul Revere was not even there, so he's getting information from people who were there. John Adams was there, but he was standing on the edge of the crowd and listening to how his cousin, Samuel Adams, was getting people all, as Barack Obama would say, get all ginned up, get all worked up. And you know what happens when a crowd gets larger and larger, and there's a lot of yelling and screaming. People do things in a crowd that they would never do as an individual. We all know that, don't we? It happens today. Well, it happened in March of 1772. So Captain Preston is trying to diffuse the situation. This is an unlawful assembly. I'm going to read you from the king, from our beloved king, the riot act to disperse and go home. Paul Revere gets the story secondhand. A wonderful piece of propaganda. And as I said, it's all a lie. What Paul Revere has done is that he takes Captain Preston and he moves him to behind the soldiers with the sword raised, as if he's given the order to fire. Never happened. If you tell a lie loud enough and long enough, over and over again, it becomes the truth, doesn't it? It becomes your truth, the group's truth. So Revere has Captain Preston behind the soldiers with the sword up, giving the order to fire. The women are all dressed in black, as if they've been out for dinner, with their husbands or boyfriends or both. Sometimes there's an open marriage, and it works very well. And they're, as long as nobody gets jealous, as long as nobody keeps a diary as where you were with whom. So these women are already dressed in black, as if they were out, with their husbands, and they're looking around. One of my favorite pieces of it is there's a man if you're looking at it, I'm looking at it, to the left, when you're looking at it, look to the left. There's a guy on the ground who's been shot with projectile bleeding. It looks like a geyser. And he's been out walking his dog. That's what you want us to think. And the dog is roaming around looking at his master. And why is my master on the ground with projectile bleeding? If you look very closely at the customs house and look at the left window, it looks as if there are soldiers firing out of the window into the crowd. It's a great piece of propaganda. Now, John Adams was not part of that crowd, but he was looking at the behavior, and he was listening. And John Adams, in a moment, will defend the soldiers. It's over in a moment. Governor Thomas Hutchinson has made his way down from where he lived, right above the Green Dragon Tavern. Governor, there's a problem here. And he showed up, and he's urging the crowd, disperse. There will be a fair trial in Boston. Justice will be served in Boston, a fair trial. I mean, nobody believed him. John Adams will try to make it a fair trial. People disperse. Now, if I'm a member of that crowd, and suddenly the guy behind me gets a musket ball in the head, and I'm covered with brains and blood, I'm out of there. I've got a job to go to. I'm married. I've got children. This is out of control. We were just here to shout, to rock and roll. And suddenly this is out of control. I'm gone. So the crowd disperses. The dead are collected. The wounded go to the infirmary. And Samuel Adams and others want these soldiers hanged this week. Hanged for crimes. Hanged. And they are not. Thomas Hutchinson, there will be a trial. Now, we need to get an attorney to represent these soldiers. And no attorney, barrister, it's a great name for that, huh? Barrister. No attorney would defend the soldiers in Captain Preston. Why? Because that means you're a loyalist. That means you're on the hit list. You're a loyalist. And so no one would take the trial, would defend the soldiers, rather. John Adams, who was there, I will defend the soldiers in Captain Preston. Now, Boston was a small town, not a city yet. It had about 15,000 people. General Gage, who was up in Halifax, General Gage, who was in charge of keeping order, brings his troops in, about 5,000 or 6,000, into Boston to settle Boston down. Boston had a reputation as being a riotous colony. If there was trouble, it's going to come from Boston. General Gage was the senior officer in North America. He does not want trouble. His job is to settle things down. And he was a good guy. He wasn't a tyrant. He's the senior officer in all of British North America. He's not a baboon. He got his job because he knew somebody or had enough money to buy a position. One could buy a position, in the British Army. You simply put it up for sale. That's like me, putting up my PhD for sale. Nobody would take it. But I might put it up for sale if somebody wanted to buy it. In any event, he was a senior officer there, and his job was to maintain order, not to start anything. And he was married to Margaret from New Jersey, who was a patriot. So he's getting it in one ear, that you've got to maintain order, and he's getting it in the other ear, that I'm a patriot. You want to be with me. We know how that works out, don't we? There's always two sides, maybe five sides to a story. So he's getting in one ear from his wife. He knows his instructions, from the ministry, Lord North, to maintain order. And no one would take the case. About 15,000 people in Boston, which is maybe the population in Holliston, I don't know. Yes. Yeah. Is it about 15,000? They don't want to pay their taxes. He's got the women dressed in black, he's got people shot, and all of it is there. And Paul Revere makes a wonderful engraving, and that became the story. It got out there first, and John Adams, I will take this case. I will defend the British soldiers for three reasons. One, it's the right thing to do. If I always like to mention John Adams as the founding father of the ACLU, to defend an unpopular cause. Everybody needs to be defended. They need someone to represent them in court. Also, he wanted to show back in England, back in Great Britain rather, that even in Boston, you can get a fair trial or get representation. And also to colonists in New York and Philadelphia, that even in Boston, which had a reputation as a rowdy town, that one can get representation. That word traveled fast, and it got to Abigail before Johnny got home that night. Now, we always view Abigail as being a sweet woman. She had a sharp tongue, and she was argumentative, and she was short. And oftentimes you want to be careful around people who are short, You know, she was argumentative and difficult. When he got home, Abigail was waiting for him. Why haven't you called? Abigail was waiting for him, and she had 2 stones in her hand that had already gone through their windows. Glass was expensive. John, is it true? Is what true? Is it true that you have agreed to defend the soldiers? It is true. It's the right thing to do. John, you will lose all your clients. He was a successful attorney in Boston. You will lose dozens and dozens of clients, and he did. More stones will come through our windows, and they did. The children will be harassed in the schoolyard, and they were. Why would you do this? Why do you always do the unpopular thing? And he would always say in his letters that if something is popular, it's not the right thing to do. If too many people like doing this, it's the wrong thing. Too many people are having fun. John Adams could be a Subic too. And then Abigail played her wild card. She took John's hand and put it on her abdomen. John, we're expecting again and again, but we're expecting again. We can't have this. And does this mean I'm going to have to move out of Boston? Abigail liked Boston. I mean, it was fun. It was exciting. The newspapers they challenged everybody. I like Boston. I don't want to move to Holliston, or I don't want to move to Braintree. Nothing happens. John said, we're going to have to get out of town for a while. And I'm taking the case. And I want folks to know that one can get a fair trial in Boston, or at least somewhat of a fair trial. Now, the crowd, Samuel Adams, want these soldiers hanged promptly within a week or so. And what John Adams does here, and this is so contemporary, he asks the judge, can we have a stay? I need time for prepare a defense, and I need people to help me. Josiah Quincy would help me prepare a defense. His brother, worked for the prosecution, talking about how that divided the family. One person at the defense table is my brother, and the other person at the at the prosecuting table is my other brother. Can you imagine that? Them leaning across the courtroom and making faces at each other, or maybe giving them the finger or something? It divided families. It divided Boston. It divided Gage between his wife and what I'm supposed to do as a senior officer in all of British North America. We read in the textbooks about the American Revolution, and or you get taught in the 4th or 5th or 6th grade, we were always right, and the British were always bloody redcoats. I'm going to defend these men. He cannot get a stay. I've got to work quickly to provide a defense, and I cannot get a change in venue. I want to have this trial in Worcester. Boston is too hot. I cannot even get a jury, and I can barely get a time to prepare my defense. So we're going to trial in October. Back at that time, a trial usually lasts an hour or so. An hour. This lasted 5 or 6 weeks. It was an hour, usually. And back then, I really like this, and at that time, the jury had to come out with a verdict. They had a few hours to come out with a verdict. And when the jury was chosen, you could not go home. Not only were you sequestered, no water, no food, no heat in the jury room. We want this trial to end quickly. Imagine that today? We want a verdict in about an hour or so. And you're not going to get any water. You're not going to be able to go to the bathroom. Nothing until we get a verdict. Different times, huh? It probably took all day to get everybody seated. I was on a jury twice. I got booted twice. For reasons I can't tell you. I got booted. Individual in seat 4, gone. I got booted twice, but I can't tell you why. And I shan't. The defense is self-defense. Back then, when an attorney began to practice law, I like that term, practice. Physicians practice. I'm going to practice giving you open heart surgery. Now, here's the textbook. I would do that, just to scare the. Here's the textbook. All right. This is sharp. Here's where I make my first cut. It's my practice, isn't it? You sell your practice. It's a great term. Defense, self-defense. Blackstones Commentary. Blackstone was the legal mind in England. And you read Blackstone, and you memorized Blackstone. And you worked with another senior attorney. And he would quiz you on what you knew on the reading, ask you to write up depositions and so forth. And how would you defend this person? And when he said, it was always a he, when he said you're eligible to practice, he would promote you. Okay, you can practice now on your own. The only agreement is do not set up shop across the street from me, because you're going to take my practice. So go somewhere else. Go to Holliston, and open up your offices there. Self-defense, self-defense, self-defense. And Blackstone, the right of every individual who fears for their life, self-defense. And John Adams and others, Quincy Adams, the soldiers are up against the wall. There's no line of retreat. If you cannot retreat and you're in danger of your life, you do what you need to do to protect. I just noticed that. Thank you. To protect yourself. They could not walk through the howling mob. It had grown to the hundreds, and there was no line of retreat through the mob. They'd get clubbed. They'd be beaten to the ground. So what happened was dreadful. It was an accident. But it's not murder. It's not even manslaughter. It's a dreadful event. The soldiers needed to protect themselves, and it was accidental. And that soldier fell, discharged his weapon, and the others thought the order had been given to fire, fire, fire. The jury, which was carefully chosen, I wasn't on it. The jury, seat 4, go. I remember that, 4. It took 2.5 hours for the jury to reach a decision. Can you imagine? I got to go. We can't leave until we get a verdict. You can't eat until we get a verdict. 2.5 hours. Not guilty, not guilty, not guilty, not guilty, not guilty. Guilty of manslaughter. Guilty of involuntary manslaughter. Not guilty, not guilty, not guilty. The courtroom erupted, like today, erupted with the non-guilty verdicts. And John Adams knew, I got to give these Bostonians something. So he gave them what today is called, or back then was called, the benefit of clergy. We never hear that today, do we? The benefit of clergy. And this goes all the way back prior to the Middle Ages. If you were a clergyman, it meant you could read. So you get a pass. It's like the Monopoly game. You get one pass, and not guilty, not guilty, not guilty. But we have to give Bostonians something. You get a pass. 2 of the jurors were chosen to have their hand burned or their thumb burned. So it would always show that I got to give something to Boston, that these 2 guys got a pass. Manslaughter, manslaughter, everybody else go. And out they marched with Captain Preston. They marched down King Street, which is still there, right? They marched down King Street, got on ships. 29th Regiment, Irish, the 29th Regiment, back to England, and they never sets foot in Boston again. Two of these guys, benefit of clergy. We have to give Boston something. We have to brand them on the hand, somewhere on the hand. Now, you can imagine that today, that you were branded? Boy, that'd be great TV, wouldn't it? You'd be able to buy tickets to that. So how was that done? They had a hibachi, if you will. They heated up the coals. They had a branding iron, and they got the coals red hot. Now, these two men, these two soldiers, are going to be branded on the hand. In this case, they were branded on the thumb to make it less visible, M on the thumb, for manslaughter. Usually you were branded somewhere on the hand, top of the hand or on the palm. Can you imagine going for a job interview and you want to be a banker? Why are you sitting on your hand? You got T for thief, and you're here to interview for being a banker? Be a great Saturday Night Live routine. These men who got the benefit of clergy were branded on the thumb with an M. Get the coals hot, get the branding iron ready to go, and everybody's waiting. If it were me, I'd say, do I get any basotracin after this? Is this going to hurt? And can you imagine the smell of burning flesh in the courtroom? John Adams, they need something, and they're going to march down King Street, and they're going to get on a ship, and they're back to England, the 29th Foot Regiment, never to return again. Now back to the Customs House. It's no longer there, but you know you can stand on a raised pedestal, I guess, on Congress Street where the shooting took place. We can't have people stopping when they're from Iowa. Stand right here, and we'll take your photograph. Maybe you're going to get run down by the tourist bus. So they have a little island, a pedestrian island. Years later, I want to add this in because it's fun. Years later, the old State House, which was the seat of royal authority, in Boston, was scheduled to be demolished. Beautiful building, isn't it? To be demolished. I don't know what was going to be there, a CVS, I don't know. And it got out to Chicago, where I'm from, that there's no history in Chicago. They're just the slaughterhouses. They're not there either. Now they're apartment buildings. And they have no history to speak of. I know they have the Ford Motor Company. That said, when they heard that the Massachusetts legislature wanted to tear down the old State House, they sent a telegram up. We want to buy it. We don't have any history. We have no colonial history. We were the frontier. All we had were the Indians, and they were coming at us from all directions. We'll buy it, and we'll come up and take it apart. And that's when it's like a yard sale. Somebody wants to buy what you have. Say, well, wait a minute. Do I really want to sell that? That's my mother-in-law's photograph. Do I really want to sell that? And so the legislature said, no, we're not going to sell it. And Chicago said, we'll still buy it, and we'll come out, take it apart, and we'll ship it back to Chicago and put it together brick by brick. And they did. No, they did not. That's when the legislature said, maybe we want to save this. It's a beautiful building, isn't it? Beautiful. The seat of royal authority in Great Britain. So the next time you want to cause trouble, bring a group of Tories with a flag and march around the State House. We want to reverse history. Did John Adams lose clients? You bet he did. Abigail had told him, John, if you accept this case, you're going to lose your clients. You're going to lose your clients. We're going to have to move out. You're never going to have a political career. Abigail, it's the right thing to do. And sometimes it is, but you've really got to stick your neck out to do it. And usually, you get in trouble, don't you? Abigail, it's the right thing to do. I mean, after all, he became the first vice president, didn't he? You know, and after all, he was part of the drafting of the Declaration of Independence. After all, he was a good friend, at least for a while, of Thomas Jefferson. Jefferson was a good friend of the Adams family, and he would be invited over for dinner. And the children called him Uncle Thomas. Not bad, Uncle Thomas, before politics split the relationship. He liked Abigail, liked her a lot. She was smart. She knew stuff. She had an opinion. And I know, I'm thinking for Thomas Jefferson. I'm sure he was thinking, what is she doing being married to him when she could be married to me? That happens all the time, right? Where's the chemistry there? What is he doing married to her? How did that happen? You know, where did that chemistry come from? I know you've all had that experience. I have. How did this happen? It has no right to happen. You know, she should be with me, or she should be with some other guy. If you go to the Boston Public Library, when you have a chance, so I'm going to give you two homeworks. One is to draw down the Paul Revere engraving and now read it the way I've explained it to you. Not explained it to you, but shared it with you. And see how it's a lie, except for the fact it happened on the right date. John Adams was always concerned about getting the details right. His first appearance in court, he got the location of the lawsuit wrong, and the judge threw it out. It was a land claim. The judge said, you filed this improperly. And he always made sure it's done properly. That's not my point. My point is you go to the Boston Public Library. This is your second homework assignment. You don't have to do it tonight. And go into the Adams room, the BPL, and he donated all of his books to the Boston Public Library. Thomas Jefferson sold them. He needed money. He was in debt, and in today's money, $3 or $4 million. So he sold them back to the government, and that became the core collection of the Library of Congress. John Adams, I want to donate everything. It's the right thing to do. I want to donate it. So you go to the Boston Public Library, and you pull books down. You got to wear your archival gloves. And you open it up. John Adams liked to argue in the margins of his books with the writer. He couldn't help himself. I'm right and you're wrong all the time. So if you look at some of the books in the margins, he would comment. That's his hand. You're holding a book that was read by John Adams, held by John Adams, and it's all frayed. And there's his handwriting, and I know his hand. And in the margin, if he were upset, there were three words that he always used. Fool, I like that. Fool, lout, L-O-U-T, and dunderhead. Now, we can use the word dunderhead. You just need to switch it up a little bit. And for me, anyway, you know, you go in there, and you hold that book. John Adams held this book, and that's his handwriting. Fool, lout, and dunderhead. I mean, you chill a little bit. This is John Adams, who most people didn't like because he always was right, or thought he was right. Thank you.